I'd like to welcome everybody to today's webinar, Personalized Content. We've prepared a very interesting and insightful agenda, and we're very excited about sharing it all today with you. I can see people are still joining us, so let's wait a couple of minutes before we begin. We have people joining us from different time zones from all around the world. I can see already people from the UK, Australia, the US, Ukraine, and even Brazil. Welcome to you all. We'll begin shortly. We're just allowing a couple more minutes for people to join. We have great weather here in Tel Aviv today. Mike, how's it with you in New York?
Here in Boston, actually, and it's freezing.
Oh,
so I have, yeah. So I have my space heater on right next to me now, which for October is not a good sign. But you know, with New England, the leaves are starting to change, so can't complain too much.
Yeah, nice fall weather, a little brisk. Okay. All right. So anyway, let's begin. I'm Ken Gelber. I'm leading business development here at Bright Info. I'll be introducing our agenda and our speakers today. We'll guide you through personalizing content from creation to conversion. First, on the content creation side, we'll host Michael Brown, the CEO and founder of N-Dash. He has somewhat unique perspective on content marketing. Over the last 10 years, he's tackled content creation from literally every angle. First as a freelance writer, then as an in-house content marketing manager, owner of a content marketing agency, and finally as the driving force behind the N-Dash content community platform. Hello, Mike. Glad to have you with us.
Yeah, good to be here, Ken. Thanks for having me.
Pleasure. Then Boaz Grunwald, an expert in conversion optimization, the founder and CEO of Bright Info, will talk about how to increase your content ROI and your website's conversion rates using personalized content recommendations. Bright Info is a personalization and CRO platform for B2B companies and online publications. Hello, Boaz. You're actually always with us, but we're still glad to see you too.
Hey, Kenny. Happy to be here.
Okay, Mike, shall we begin?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. Thank you, Mike and Boaz. Really, let's get going.
Great. Let me just get the presentation up here. Well, you know, one of the first things I, wanted to talk about here, so we can kind of go through the agenda. I'll be covering the first 3 points that you're seeing on the slides today. And where I wanted to start was the idea of, what types of content are going to be successful. So, in other words, in order for personalization to work, in order for content to, deliver on its promise and to, help you grow the business and the brand, it has to convey a certain level of expertise to your audience. So it can't be surface level. It can't be generic types of content. One of the most valuable things you have as a brand is your insights and your expertise. So the content that you have really needs to reflect that. Now, extracting this insight, conveying this expertise isn't always easy. And there are, sort of big risks for not doing so. So, for example, if you're a cybersecurity company and you're targeting, CTOs, developers, and DevOps, you're not going to get very far with your content if you're talking about, if you're publishing content that's like, what is a data breach or why data breaches are important. The audience you're going after already knows this. So if you're publishing that type of content, you're going to lose credibility. You're not going to move people further down the funnel, and content's just going to be sort of an empty activity for you. So content creators themselves are really kind of a dime a dozen right now. There are hundreds, thousands, probably even millions of people throughout the world and online willing to write content for you, but they tend to be generalists, and brands really aren't looking for that type of content anymore, if they ever were. The challenge is in finding those experts. So luckily, there are more sources, for this type of insight and expertise than you might imagine. And in fact, where you sit today, you're probably surrounded by these experts already, and it's a wealth of, wealth of information for future content. So, as you can see here on slide 5, the way that content is being developed has changed quite drastically, even just over the last couple of years. We're seeing, and this is based on HubSpot's State of the Inbound report that recently came out. I'm sure a lot of you guys have seen this, but what this slide is really telling us is that there's a sharp increase in who brands are relying on to create their content. So most notably, we're seeing freelancers, executives, and internal staff. the question is, why is this happening? And I think that one of the reasons is that, the demands of modern content creation are far too burdensome for 1 to 2 people. Your internal marketing team, 1 to 2 marketers might be able to do this alone for a while, but eventually they're going to run out of steam. So I have firsthand experience, running out of steam. At a couple jobs before I started Ndash, I was really kind of the lone content creator. I was, updating the company blog and 3 microsites on a daily basis. This in addition to, the white papers, the case studies, the emails, all of those, content assets. And probably not a surprise to the audience here, I eventually burned myself out doing this. And, the worst part was that the quality of the content really started to suffer. So if we go back to, expertise, who we were targeting, we were a tech company at the time. As it turns out, I wasn't even the best person to be writing that content. We had, developers, we had product people, salespeople, and executives. Some of the, people that you see on this slide today, they were the ones that should have been contributing more, to the space. So my role should really have been to manage the people in the process and not necessarily write everything myself. And you can see from the slides here that other brands have made this realization. They're relying on a wider group for content creation. So basically, what this is saying is that the new way to create content, to drive leads and to drive the business isn't by relying on 1 to 2 contributors. It's not even just relying on writers per se. It requires, assembling a team of in-house resources, so your marketers, your writers, your subject matter experts, but also, freelance writers, outside contributors. And you can really start to see this in effect with big brands like HubSpot and brands that, do content really well. I'll throw some compliments to Bright Info. I think you guys do a great job at this, is that you're looking at the content and you're seeing that it's coming from multiple contributors. So you're seeing it's diverse in terms of its viewpoints and opinions, but consistent, as a brand. So you can see, other companies not doing this well, where you see the same writer, the same author contributing, really the same types of content on a regular basis, and that's just not a recipe for success. So, one of the things, it's important to get these different personas contributing content to your brand, but that's really not going to happen unless they're first contributing ideas. So one of the things that I've noticed in the last, decade in content is that probably the biggest obstacle to consistent content creation isn't necessarily the size of your team. It's not how much money you have. It's the way that, content ideas are formed and acted on. So if we go to the next one here, we want to get into this idea, I wanted to touch on this idea of crowdsourcing content ideation. So in other words, what do I mean by that? Well, it's basically like an open source content calendar where internal and external members can contribute ideas, they can contribute posts in a way that's a little more fluid than, a top-down type of management structure. So on the freelance side of things, your outside contributors, companies tend to see these people as, as a way to sort of offload work. When the schedule's too busy, when there's too much going on, we'll send that to a freelancer and they'll send it back to us. But if you pick the right, team of freelancers, or you have the right, outside contributors, those people are going to be full of great ideas. They're going to know your brand. They're going to know the space just like your internal team, and they should be relied on, for some of that idea generation. One of the other mistakes I've seen, even with companies where there might be multiple contributors, it's usually, 1 to 2 people kind of coming up with the ideas. And, while that might work in terms of, the volume that you can push out, this is eventually going to result in content that's a little bit stale and a little bit repetitive. So our whole thing, for the past couple of years has been to open this up, let outsiders, suggest themes and topics, require your in-house resources, your subject matter experts, and your in-house writers to continually pitch content ideas, even if they're not the ones doing the actual creation. So, what we're seeing here, it's not a greatly designed slide, but it is effective in kind of conveying that, this is a two-way street. So in the middle here would be a content marketing manager or, like some sort of managing editor whose job it is to facilitate the flow of content and the flow of ideas between these various channels. So that's kind of how you want to, structure your team to deliver more content. But where do these ideas actually come from? I think there's some practical things that we can kind of go over on, ways that we've used to come up, continually come up with new ideas both for ourselves and our clients over the years. So I wanted to touch on a few of these in particular here. So on competitor sites, I don't think enough companies really view content as a competitive differentiator. I think that will change in time, but in the meantime, I really strongly urge companies to take a close look at what your competitors are publishing. See if there are ways where you can dive deeper into a topic or offer more value than them. Keep an eye on your customer sites as well. See what types of content your customers are publishing. See what's important to them. That's a really good source of ideas. On the publication side, we used to have, back in the early days, this concept of a blog roll, and you would see it on almost every company blog. It would be a list of publications and sources. That's kind of gone away, and I think it's a shame because just having that list of publications that you can source or reference on a regular basis goes a long way towards coming up with, content ideas and finding new angles and themes. When I talk about value prop, I'm really talking about, certain features of your product or service that you want to write content to reflect. So in other words, if you're a tech company that makes PCI compliance easier, then you want to, find some, some ways to work PCI compliance into your content. You want to, scan the news and see what's being written about, but it's really kind of, finding what that value prop is, finding a certain feature, and writing content that supports it, even, especially very subtly. Analytics and existing content, obviously you want to be keeping track of your top performing content. You want to spin that off and do more of it. But also on the existing content side. So Boaz is going to talk a lot about, getting the most out of the content you've already done. But to kind of, piggyback off that, you want to repurpose your existing content as much as you can. So take a white paper and see if there are, 5 different blog posts you can make out of it and vice versa. I'm sure that after this webinar, both of us are going to be dicing up this, the content that you see here into, smaller pieces. Just a good way to, you should always sort of be existing what content you already have. So those are some practical tips. In some ways now, we've, very briefly gone over, kind of the way you should structure your team, the way you should sort of facilitate ideas. The question now is, how do you actually make sure that content is personalized? And I think that comes down to a couple different things. One of them is topic. Are the topics that you're writing about relevant to your audience? And the other is timing. So, we know about, at this point you probably know a lot about who your audience is. You might not necessarily know where they are. And when I say where, I mean in the context of the buyer journey. Are they just in the awareness stage? Are they, have they interacted with your content? Are they close to buying? Kind of understanding where they are in that buyer journey is probably, one of the bigger points that you want to consider here. So you can see from, some of the stats here that this is actually another major roadblock to, achieving success with content and content personalization. And we're finding that the majority of companies are neglecting, either neglecting key personas or they're neglecting, key parts of the buyer journey. So in other words, companies might be writing for the top of the funnel and the bottom of the funnel, but they're leaving out everything in between, and that's a big gap in your operation. And it probably comprises, a lot of your, a big portion of your audience. So, you might end up having the technical capability to target people at different stages and to present them, with different types of content for those stages. But if the content is really all the same, it's not going to be effective. And obviously, the analytics will prove that. So we've talked a lot of high-level stuff right now. I wanted to, kind of conclude this section of the webinar with a few tips on, how to actually start to implement this in ways that will make it easier, a little bit more streamlined. And I wanted to start with the idea of sharing your content calendar. So almost all the stats, indicate that, marketing companies by and large use a content calendar. They do it to plan ahead, they do it to stay organized, but very few of them actually share that with their extended team. So it's usually, the content calendar is usually something that, the marketing decision makers have control of, and they share as on sort of a need-to-know basis. So if we go back to what we talked about before, where you have this free flow of ideas, those ideas are great, but they're really less effective if other people aren't seeing them. So you want to find a tool or find a way that makes it easy for everyone on your new sort of extended content team to see what these proposed ideas are. Obviously this will prevent, different contributors from repeating the same types of content. It's going to help you be a little even more nimble and plan ahead even better. But it's going to, help other contributors come up with new ideas. So if I see that, Bill from product marketing has suggested 3 topics, that might spark, ideas in my mind for 3 additional topics. So I think this whole idea of, yes, you need to create a content calendar, but the more important thing is that you need to share it. And I don't think enough companies are doing that, and it's something that's very, very easy to do. The next is to kind of create a content chain of command. So in other words, who's in charge? Who approves an idea? Who manages the deadline? Who handles the edits? Who posts on the site? When you're small, it's easy to dismiss something like this. But you'd be surprised how quickly this lack of organization can really slow things down as you start to grow. So back in our agency days, we would work with clients where, it seemed like we had 10 editors on an assignment. The clients were, redlining things and making comments and making edits and suggestions. And it turns out none of them were actually authorized to approve the posts. So, we would end up writing content that wouldn't get published for, weeks or months. In some cases, the content would never get published at all. And it was because there was really no chain of command. So I think the larger you get and the more content you produce, the more important this becomes for you. But again, I really suggest that you not wait until you're big to do this. You want to do it now. The last piece of advice that I wanted to share kind of relates to future-proofing. So ultimately, you don't want your content operation to be dependent on one person or 1 to 2 people. You want this to grow and flourish and to be consistent, really no matter who's a part of it. And to do that, you need to start prioritizing knowledge transfer. The easiest way to do this is by documenting the most basic parts about your brand and what your content is supposed to be doing. So these are just a few things that we've included in our content guidelines. And when we work with a company, these are a few of the things that we ask them. But I wanted to touch on some of them real quick before we move along here. Content goals. You want everyone to know why they're contributing. It sounds a little bit silly to have to say that. But if your contributors don't know why they're writing content, there's going to be a huge disconnect, and you're not going to achieve your goals. So, I mean, I'm guessing that the audience listening to this, it's all about lead generation and conversion, which is great. That's those are our goals as well. But you might have secondary goals or other points of emphasis that you want to call out. Maybe it's thought leadership. Maybe you're trying to build a community. Whatever those goals may be. But if if people don't know why they're contributing, there's going to be a big disconnect there. So topics and subjects, you want to share with current and future contributors, what's worked in the past, like what types of content are you interested in producing. And it could be, the types of content, so blog posts or long form articles, but it also is the, the topics and the subject matter to this. So, are you interested in publishing how-to articles? Are you looking for trends and analysis? Are you looking for opinion pieces? Like, these are things that are important to put out there and share, just so that, again, the content can be consistent over a longer time frame. Audience insights, you want to know your buyers, you want to know your audience, and you want to know how they're interacting with that content. So, I'm not saying, give every contributor or give your entire team access to that data, but there are certain things that you're going to want to pick out and share accordingly. So you want to share, things like what is the top performing content, what types of content, convert at a higher rate. Not necessarily every piece, but, finding those, those pieces of content that resonate with certain parts of your audience and making sure that's, documented and known to people. Other stuff, length, tone, approved links and sources, some of the other guidelines that would be, really sort of a basic editorial guide. Really important, but probably worth mentioning here. Again, you want your content operation to work regardless of who's in charge. You want it to be consistent and future-proof, and these are just a few of the ways to make that happen. So I hope to have shown that, that the requirements that you face in terms of quality and volume and management are achievable no matter how big or small your content your content team is. So now that you have some of this foundation, you have an idea of how to structure the team, you have an idea of how the workflow should, be in place. We can now start to talk about, how to get that content to achieve its intended results. And for that, I'm going to hand it back over to Boaz here.
Thanks, Mike. Appreciate it. That was very insightful, and I definitely learned a lot about content creation done right. So for my part, I'm going to talk a little bit about, or quite a bit about relevancy and how relevancy makes a lot of difference. We're going to talk a lot about misconceptions and about problems that people basically ignore once they have a lot of content and really don't know what to do with it. But it all starts and ends with relevancy. Ideally, we want to make sure that all the information and content that we develop hits an accord and is actually gets to its destination, which is the right person at the right, buying or intent phase, and obviously at the right time. One of the misconceptions is that we focus a lot about the known visitors. So if, on a typical website, 2, 3, or up to 5% actually convert and become known visitors, and the majority of the analytics systems really focus on that area, and the marketing team focus on that area as well, and try to better serve that little audience. The thing is, if you are able to crack what's interesting for the 95% of your anonymous visitors who come to your site, kick the tires, look around, but eventually fade away and never come back, that's a huge scale potential for you. And that's where we recommend as one insight to focus your attention on. Make sure that you fill the content gaps for that audience as a way to drive substantial scale. In general, what we're looking to do with our content is to create a relationship. We want to obviously build the content as a way to get found online. The search engines really drove all the content creation drive, because you want people who are looking for what you offer to actually be able to find you. But then once they find you, you really need to have enough content, the right mix of content to be able to turn initial interest to appreciation, have the person on your sites say to himself or herself, hey, maybe it is a trustful advisor that I need to consume more content or information from, and maybe I should even consider them for a purchase or a business relationship. So you really want to make sure that you have everything aligned, and for that you need obviously the right content and also enough data to deliver relevancy. The problem that with most content organizations is that they create content at a much higher pace than they can, effectively share online or on their site, on their blog. If you think about a typical blog section where new content is being generated a couple of times a week at least, obviously new articles are going to fade away within a couple of weeks because they're going to just get buried down in the pile of all the content, and the new content items, the new pieces of blog posts are going to take the majority of attention at the top of the page. And that's, again, one of the things that is critical in order to make effective use of your content. You really want to shorten the distance and make sure that your audience doesn't really need to dig deep in order to get to what's interesting to them, because as we all know, online attention spans are diminishing and your audience will not take that much of a bigger step or the extra mile to get to your content. And so eventually they will lose interest and walk away and, find what they need somewhere else. So ideally, although you have a lot of content and you bury it all in some sort of a blog or a resource section, you really want to make sure that you find the ways to serve it up, make it proactive, not passive, as a way to create the relevancy and engagement. So what are the successful elements of a good content pool or a good mass of content for your audience? Ideally, you really want to make sure that you have enough content that's relevant to all the different types of people visiting your site. We actually call them, or the market actually calls them, personas. So you got different products. Different products are of interest to different types of buyers, depending on the product, depending on the type of purchase made. In some cases, if it's a sophisticated purchase, more than one buyer is involved in the same deal. You got, financial buyer, you got maybe a technical buyer, you got a business decision maker. So you can potentially have multiple buyers associated with a single deal. On the other hand, obviously, different products, different markets can result in different types of buyers for those other different products. And then on top of that, you have to keep in mind that with today's sophisticated and diversified digital world and landscape, where you can read about a product from actually on a publication or just read about it on a review site or be recommended through social media, the different buyer personas may come to your site already at different stages of the buyer journey. So ideally, you really want to kind of have enough content to be able to serve for each persona, for each buyer, and for each stage in the buyer journey, the most relevant piece, because that's sort of like your lingo or your language when you engage with your audience. You want to make sure that you have all the words, all the vocabulary necessary, regardless of their stage or where they heard about you. Typically, the market is talking about the three main steps in the buyer journey. There's the awareness stage, where people are looking for a solution. They may not have heard about you specifically as a potential vendor for their problem, but they're aware that they have an issue and they're looking for content around that issue and how they can possibly resolve it. And in this specific stage, typically you want to serve some sort of an awareness, high-level, lighter, snackable content that will allow them to get to know you and show them that you are a subject matter expert on that topic. Once they have found you, you really want to try and sort of let them binge on content and consume more content as much as possible to get them to see that you're a credible source of relevant content for their specific issue, and move them to consider you as a potential partner. And then the third phase is the decision phase, where they will are ready to potentially make a purchase, and they're considering, purchasing from you as a business or from other alternatives. Here are some of the different types of content that's different firms use for different stages. Again, what we see typically on the awareness stage is that it's higher level content, editorial, for example, could be articles, could be blog posts, and anything that's sort of catering to your buyer's needs. Consideration typically is deeper content, more detail-oriented. Could be a webinar or a detailed podcast or a product comparison or a position paper. And then, when you're thinking about the decision phase, it's much more technical and detail-oriented. Live demos seem to be pretty popular. So we're going to talk now that we have covered, the types of content and how to make sure that you have enough relevant content. Let's talk about how to use it in order to deliver it in context, which will also help you extend the content shelf life. Ideally, the content shelf life, again, are kind of related to your pace of generating content. If you don't have the right infrastructure to serve up content dynamically, then the faster you generate content, content gets outdated and out of sight and will be lost, and its shelf life will be shorter because it won't be discoverable easily on your site anymore. The ideal scenario is that you are able to provide content easily, like Amazon does, or like we all binge on content in VOD environments. You just want to serve content that's related or is the most sort of native next step to the previous piece of content. And obviously you want to do that across visits as well, because again, there's a lot of stats today talking about the fact that with all the digital channels, buyers go back and forth across channels to consume content from vendors. So let's talk a little bit about why content recommendation is so critical. First of all, typical B2B content, as you can see on the left-hand side, is only 40% of it is used, 60 and sometimes 70% of it is unused. If you can recommend the most relevant content on every occasion and make sure that the content base, your content base covers 100% of your content, obviously you can use all of your content. In the process, you extend the shelf life of it, as you can see on the right-hand side, because you can always serve it up to the relevant buyer, depending on the stage and their interest and context. And that's how you achieve a longer shelf life, higher ROI, and obviously relevancy, which attributes to a much bigger conversion rate online, as we can see on the right-hand side graph. Ideally, sophisticated personalization and content recommendation solutions really want to take into account as much data as possible to make sure that the relevancy is personalized, that it's truly serving the most relevant information for the visitor that's currently on your site. So individual behavior, semantic analytics, use of content assets, and also considering things like the crowd behavior are things that really can help sophisticated solution pinpoint the most relevant piece of content or next step on every page and serve it up to the individual. And then that's also one of the sort of big things that are left undiscussed. But excuse me, once you have a lot of content and you don't serve it up dynamically, how do you know what's of interest to your audience? And that circles back directly to what Mike talked about before, how do you know what content to build next if you don't know what's of interest to your audience because it's tucked away again under a research section or a blog section or both? Ideally, you want to serve content dynamically by interest or intent and really be able to analyze on a per content piece, on a per interest, what's working, what's not working, and this will really help you figure out what to build moving forward, what's successful, what's not successful, because suddenly you're exercising 100% of your content and you understand how that content is perceived by your audience. So if we just kind of sum up the importance of relevant content, we want to make sure that we build the right content to cover all the personas and stages in the buyer journey and potentially all the interest areas of your audience. And we want to make sure that we serve it in content because otherwise it's just going to have a short shelf life and it's not going to be used much. And if we do it right, if we build it and serve it, then we can also close the feedback loop, analyze what's working and what's not working, and be able to build better content moving forward.
Okay, so Mike, Boaz, thank you so very much. Excellent presentations, fascinating. We had received a number of questions. I'd like to give each of you a couple of questions, if that's okay. Okay, so first, Boaz, we have a question from Jess in Boston. Says he has quite an active blog with more than a dozen white papers and ebooks. From your experience, what is the most recommended ratio between gated and ungated content?
Okay, thanks, Ken. That's a pretty advanced question. So from our experience working with hundreds of customers, we have the data and we know that generally speaking, the more gated content, the better conversion rates you get or the more conversion you get from your site because simply put, the audience needs to put in their details in order to read content. The more you lock or gate your content, the highest impact starts to be visible between 60 and 70%. So if you gate 60 to 70% of your content, that's where you get the majority of return ratios in terms of conversion rates. After 70%, we saw that the impact peaks. So you may want to leave 20 or 30% of your content open, so it's better picked up by search engines and it's more accessible to the awareness stage.
Okay, and one more question for Boaz. Joe from Austin says that he feels there's been a lot of buzz, a lot of discussion lately about intrusive pop-ups. Do you have a take on that?
Well, I think pop-ups are just a vehicle. Obviously, no one likes to have an intrusive experience, and each business has its own ideas about what's intrusive and non-intrusive. We believe that the question is different. The question is more about serving the right information in the right context. If you serve the right information in the right context and you make sure that it's really helping your audience, then how to serve it is not necessarily, bothering your audience. Regardless, there's a lot of different ways that you can serve content in a non-intrusive way, and good products give you the flexibility to achieve that. But we believe in serving smart content or serving it smartly, and then the audience seems to pay back in spades in terms of things like time on site, content pieces read, and obviously conversions.
Excellent. We're almost out of time. I have a couple of questions from Mike. Mike, Rachel from New York has what she described as a medium-sized B2B business, and she would like to know how many writers should she use?
53.
Are you sure it's not 53 and a half? One part-timer?
Okay. It's a very precise formula. No, I mean there is no precise answer to this. I think it depends on what type of business that you have, and what type of content marketing operation you want to have. So, for instance, if you're launching a publication, you want to be a media company, you're probably going to need 100 or 150 people, kind of contributing on a regular basis. If you look at sites, news sites like the Huffington Post and USA Today, they have probably even more than that. If you're a mid-sized B2B tech company, you might be able to get away with, if you have some in-house resources, 3 to 4, maybe 5 freelancers that you use on a regular basis. A lot of it comes down to what you want those freelancers writing about. So, for instance, on our brand, we obviously use freelancers, and some of them we rely on for certain expertise, but some of them are just better at writing certain types of copy. So, the writer who's great at in-depth technical white papers might not be the same writer you want to use for landing pages and email. So, if you have a wide range of content deliverables that you're producing, you might want a few more. And if your personas are much different as well, so if you have very technical personas, but there's also overview type of content that you can provide to them, you might want different people that specialize in different things. So in her in her case, I would say try to find 3 to 5 writers at least to start that you're comfortable working with, that that they understand the space and can deliver what you're looking for. Great.
Okay. We have time for one more question from Mike. It's another number question, so I hope the answer is not 53. Jim from San Francisco is asking, how many different audience segments should you ideally personalize for?
All of them. You want to, I guess if the number, the number of audience segments is usually between 3 to 5. I take it that that's how I'll answer the question is how many which ones are you personalized for in terms of where they are I guess in the buyer journey. So you want content that speaks to the different personas that are in the awareness stage, but those different people will have different interests, different pain points. You want different messages as they get further along that buyer journey. So you might be talking to an influencer to start, but the content that you have for them further down the funnel is going to be much different than content for the decision maker. So you want to personalize for every one of those stages, no matter who you're talking to, really. I think that's one of the things that both of us kind of touched on in this presentation is that relevancy is king. They say content is king, but it's really relevant content that's king. So that would be my advice there. Make sure that every persona, every stage is getting stuff that they're interested in, and that they're interested in it, based off the analytics and the data.
Okay. Well, we have many more questions, and we'd love to answer them, but unfortunately we're out of time. If anybody has questions they'd like to post on the Bright Info Facebook account, please feel free to do so, and we'll get to answer them from there. Mike, Boaz, thank you so much for excellent presentations, and we'll be sending the recording to all the attendees and registrants in a couple of days.
Excellent. Thanks so much.
Yep. Thank you, guys. Thanks for the opportunity.